Good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated economist here. So, I'm going to leave a link down in the description for you guys to an article that is interviewing Mohammed El Aaron, who is that famous economist that all the news stations seem to want to interview and quote. And he has said in this recent interview that the Federal Reserve needs to do two things in order to continue on with their monetary policy. And now the very first one that he is talking about is they need to get their credibility back. And I thought to myself, what is that supposed to mean? Like, the Federal Reserve is supposed to be credible? In what way? Like, nobody seems to believe the Federal Reserve. Everybody thinks they're behind the curve. Everybody seems to think that the Federal Reserve is the main reason why we are experiencing the economic downturn that we are about ready to go into, or on a severe basis go into, because a lot of people are already feeling the economic downturn. A lot of people are saying that the Federal Reserve is the reason why we have experienced such rapid inflation, such high inflation, and that the cure for this inflation is going to damage the economy. I mean, this is like pretty much the common narrative out there. And now what I found interesting about this credibility tactic is that the Federal Reserve has been using something called forward guidance. And a lot of people don't seem to understand what this means, this forward guidance, even though they just straight up tell you, this is what we're doing. We are telling the markets what it is that we want them to understand and believe that we are going to do into the future, so that they can position themselves in that condition before we get there. So if they are going to raise rates, they want the markets to behave as if they had already raised the rates, so that by the time they raise the rates, they're not creating a shock and awe event. Now, the taper tantrum that had taken place back in, 2017, I think is what it was, 2017, 18, something like that, where the Federal Reserve attempted to raise interest rates and the markets got really mad at that. Well, that was because they were going into something that they called Autopilot, where they were going to let the interest rates rise a quarter point every quarter for the foreseeable future. They were just going to be like on this autopilot, like they weren't going to be making any decisions or monetary decisions every quarter. They were just going to let the interest rates, the Fed funds rates rise a quarter percentage point every quarter. And the markets hated that idea. They didn't like this idea that there was going to be no future expectations of what it is that the Federal Reserve was going to do. They were just going to raise the rates going into the future regardless. And the markets hated this, right? They pretty much forced the Federal Reserve to reverse course almost immediately before they even really had a chance to raise rates. So this time around, they're not going into the autopilot program. They went into forward guidance. They said, hey, here in a few months, we're going to raise rates. And now the markets really took that to heart, and they started behaving as if the Federal Reserve was raising rates. And this is where a lot of economists say that the Federal Reserve is no longer in control, because the markets were reacting before the Federal Reserve did anything. Before they raised the rates, the markets were reacting to an economy. But they were reacting to the Fed's jawboning. They were reacting to the forward guidance that the Federal Reserve was putting out there. And now, if you look at it that way, then you can see it. You're like, okay, well, the Federal Reserve said that they were going to raise rates, and the markets almost immediately started to behave as if they had raised the rates. And then by the time the Federal Reserve did start raising rates, the markets were already conditioned for it. So this is really where the Federal Reserve is getting their powers, that they are able to put out this idea that they're going to raise rates, and they can get the markets to react to that. The Fed doesn't really have to do anything. I mean, now they do have to come through with the rate raising, with the with the rising of the interest rates. If they don't do it, if they say, hey, we're putting out this forward guidance, we are going to raise rates into the future, if they don't do it, then the markets are going to they're going to go into that taper tantrum, right? They will go into a tantrum type attitude, as they are like, oh no, we don't know what to expect out of the Federal Reserve. So when the Fed says, hey, we are going to raise rates into the future, they really are going to raise them. But now, if we go and look at the Federal Reserve speech just 3 weeks ago, Michelle Bowman had already stated they are abandoning, gosh, I have a hard time talking, It's amazing that I even have a YouTube channel. I can't even speak the English language. Okay. They are getting rid of the idea of using forward guidance. The Federal Reserve is. And Michelle Bowman made that statement in that Federal Reserve speech a couple of weeks ago. So we already know that the Federal Reserve is not using forward guidance. So why do you need credibility? See, Mohammed El-Aaron is still under the idea that they are going to listen to the Federal Reserve as what they need to do going into the future. Like people think, okay, we need to listen to the Fed for the forward guidance. But the Federal Reserve said we're not using forward guidance anymore. We're not going to tell the markets what it is that we're going to do going into the future. What I found interesting about that is that after Michelle Bowman made that statement within the Federal Reserve speech that they are no longer using this forward guidance, this job owning, this credible threats, as soon as she said that, it was almost immediately after that Jerome Powell gave another speech talking about how they are going to get aggressive and how it's going to be painful for the people. Credible threat, right? Soon as she said that we are not going to use credible threats, they immediately come out with a credible threat. What do the markets react to? Holy moly, they're going to continue to raise interest rates 0.75 of a percentage point. This is what everybody believes, even though the Federal Reserve didn't actually state that. Now the governors have. They say they believe that the FOMC should vote in such a way that they continue to raise interest rates going into the future. This is what a lot of the Fed governors have said. Just go and look at the interviews that have come out just recently, from Mestrich to Brainerd to John Williams. I mean, all of them, all these Fed governors and presidents are coming out saying that they feel that the interest rate should continue to rise going into the future. But the Federal Reserve didn't actually make that statement. Jerome Powell hasn't said that. It's not part of the credible threats. Now, they put out that credible threat to the media, right? So that the markets will believe that there is going to be lifting of interest rates going into the future. So that is a credible threat, but it's not coming directly from the Fed. It's coming from the Fed presidents. There's a major difference inside of that. See, a lot of people look at Jerome Powell as some sort of like power figure at the Federal Reserve. He's not. He is just merely the spokesperson for the Federal Open Market Committee, which is a board of many 12, I believe? Is it 12 governors and presidents that make up this Federal Open Market Committee who decide on monetary policy? So it's not Jerome Powell who's making the decision on this stuff. It's the Federal Open Market Committee who is making this monetary policy decisions. And they are not using forward guidance. They are not saying that we are going to raise rates into the future. What they are saying is that they are going to be data dependent on whether or not they raise rates going into the future. Then on the backside of it, the credible threats come from the Fed presidents and governors who are being interviewed on the mainstream media, who then use that forward guidance, who are using the credible threats, and then telling the markets, hey, we are going to raise interest rates going into the future. And then the markets go and start reacting as if they had raised rates going into the future. Or at least, putting themselves into position so that they will be ready for the lifting of interest rates the next time the Federal Reserve goes to, decide whether or not they're actually going to raise rates or not. So this is really something that we have to pay attention to, because even by Mohammed El-Aaron, I mean, he is saying that they need to get this credibility. They need to have it. And the Federal Reserve is saying we don't even need the credibility because we're not using forward guidance. And then immediately all the presidents and governors come out there saying, hey, guess what? We're going to raise rates into the future, so you all better react to it. See what's happening here? I mean, this is the mind games that they play. See, a lot of people are not quite aware of this. Like they don't look at what the Federal Reserve is doing as far as that psychological manipulation with the markets. When they say that they are going to do something, the markets react to that. And when people say they have lost all their credibility and that you shouldn't even listen to the Federal Reserve, well, that's fine. You don't have to listen to them, but the markets do. And the markets react to everything that the Federal Reserve says. And you have to understand what it is that they are saying and why they are saying it and what the reaction of the people are from that. Uneducated economist, you guys let me know.